This is my most excited thing to talk about, and it's because it's something that I have like an encyclopedic knowledge of,
Oh boy.
that I know the history of and have thoughts on. And you probably don't know the first thing about. So,
Yes,
um,
I believe you.
similar dynamic here going from X-Men to this. And um, what that is has been hinted at this whole time, actually.
Oh,
So,
foreshadowing.
yeah, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But so this year at San Diego Comic Con, a trailer and a lot of more details about a movie that's coming out next year, I believe. God, I should check that. When is it coming out?
Always good to have the right release date. You don't want to get people too
I
upset.
just
Like,
really
what?
there's some more time in this year, so okay, it's coming out in March, sometime in March 2023. It looks like so early next year. Um, anyway, a lot of more information was released about this. There's some more cast reveals, and what that is it's a movie that was stuck in kind of a development hell for quite some time, over 10 years. It's had some bad versions in the past, and this is its first, I think, really highly marketed, like highly visible version that is probably going to meet the eyes of more people than just those who are fans of it. And that is Dungeons and Dragons
Oh
Honor
yes.
Among Thieves, an upcoming movie based in the Dungeons and Dragons lore universe, um, using things that lore that fans of Dungeons and Dragons and people who use the source books in their games will recognize, and it's going to be a feature film. So Dungeons and Dragons, for the uninitiated. A lot of times I bring it up and people are like, "Is that a video game or something?" Usually
No,
older
do people
people.
actually say video game?
I don't like. Some people just like, I've heard of it, but I just don't understand or know any. Like I don't know. And I was about to say like older people. Like obviously Dungeons and Dragons came out in the 70s. Like the people who have the most history with like the lore of this and the history of this, or the people who started playing it back then and have been fans of it ever since. Like they're Gen X or even boomers who like got into Dungeons and Dragons like before video games were really even a thing. And that's because it's a pen and paper RPG with books of rules, and
I'm not gonna lie.
but
Every time you bring it up, I'm like, man, this sounds so complicated.
which segueing into the next part, which is, even though there's books of rules, I think the real core of this game is not rules, but an improvisational, um, like it ranges from just pure like fantasy drama improv to just almost like improv comedy. I think there's a tie over into a lot of like fans of improv comedy or comedy in general. I think that's the reason why there's a lot of like live D&D play podcasts and like streams, is because I think there's a crossover with like improv comedy and stuff, where a lot of people get into it are good at like coming up with things on the fly. And the beauty of Dungeons and Dragons to me is that anyone can get into it, because all it really takes is one person who really knows the rules, the dungeon master, to kind of facilitate and oversee the fun, the entertainment of it, and try and encourage people to get comfortable and improv on certain things. And some people who are really like into games might try and heighten the rules element, like make it kind of a war game and like roll a d20, add this much, add the modifier, see if you hit versus their armor, and then roll to damage. You roll a d8 for a long sword, and then you add your strength modifier. Like, that stuff is in the game. But I think what's great, and this is kind of like maybe in the 70s and early 80s, the game might have, I'm not sure, but it might have leaned in that direction. But these days, I think we're seeing a lot of like emphasis on the storytelling aspect of the game, which allows people to kind of put the rules in the background a little bit and just try and create, usually, I mean, if we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, because there are a lot of pen and paper RPGs that have slightly different rules, but have different, like, any theme you could imagine, like whether sci-fi or superhero or whatever it might be. But Dungeons and Dragons is what it is because it's a set of rules that tells you how to do improvisational stories in a fantasy world, more specifically. So yeah, it is what it is because of the lore behind it, and some of the creatures in the monster manual created by like Gary Gygax and some of the original people. So it has all these famous monsters and stuff that people have had to fight and have lost their beloved characters to, or there have been like stories or campaigns written that people can play within. Like, for example, I'm running a game right now as a dungeon master, so I have to know all the rules, and everyone else just has to make characters and improv with me, and I tell them when they need to roll the dice. But I'm running a book called Curse of Strahd, which is like a gothic horror story, which the outline of the story is there, but because it's improv, the characters can go in different directions and divert from the story and kind of treat it like just a sandbox to make a story in. And that's the amazing thing about D&D, is that everyone who's played it has had their own completely different personal interaction with it. And I think that does make it very hard to make a movie about this, because no one person's experience with D&D is the same. It's not like a comic book where like there is a reference. Like, you can't reference the story exactly of someone's campaign because that's like private to them. So the idea of making a movie about D&D, you kind of have to make a story. It's not improvised. So it's really just kind of set in the world and has the creatures. So so the movie kind of has the challenge of capturing the spirit of Dungeons and Dragons in as wide of a net as possible, which I think in the past, I think there has been another Dungeons and Dragons movie in the past that went under the radar and was considered just a dud. Probably a box office failure. I really don't know much about it. I think there was like a 2002 movie or something.
Right now.
But this new movie, Honor Among Thieves, I do feel like it captures a lot of the points of D&D that people would recognize and are just famous at this point. Let me see. Let me get back to my notes because there's something I wanted to bring up. So, yeah, obviously, getting back to the idea of the movie, everything I just mentioned will flavor some of my thoughts on it. Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, coming out in 2023. The cast: Chris Pine playing a bard, Michelle Rodriguez, Regé-Jean Page, Justice Smith, and Sophia Lillis, I believe. She was in it.
Oh, well.
She's playing a druid, a tiefling druid. So, yeah, it's a classic adventuring party, and It's coming out, I think, at the right time because this is arguably the most popular Dungeons and Dragons has ever been, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it finally escaped a development hell. So I'm excited about this mostly as a chance. Like, I'm glad that this movie's coming out as a chance to like talk about D&D and hope that more people will get into it. And obviously Stranger Things has done a pretty good job of doing that already. But there are a couple things though. Like watching the trailer and seeing, I agree with some reactions to it, which is that the from the trailer, it looks a little like so I think people have been starting to get sick of I mean, I think you've been sick of it for a while, and I think the broader public is starting to get more generally sick of this sort of like millennial snarky humor in a lot of high budget studio movies,
Yes.
basically Marvel humor. Um, if a lot of people's reaction to this trailer, and I can see where it's coming from, is like this is just another high budget movie with some like quips, like an action movie with some like just kind of like passably funny, safe humor that's just like like oh like the he's right behind me, isn't he? I don't like that isn't in the trailer. It's just like that's the kind of humor I'm talking about.
Well, I looked it up and I know why it feels like there's Marvel humor in it.
Oh, is it writers or?
It's directed by Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly, who also wrote the film's screenplay, who wrote the screenplay for Spider-Man Homecoming.
Oh, they wrote the screenplay. Okay.
And they're the directors.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of I've seen a lot of reactions to that where people are just like really worried about the humor and like this just not landing.
They also wrote and directed Vacation.
Nice. Nice. That makes me. That's funny because I literally wrote in my notes. I'm a little worried about this too, but I can only hope it leans more towards Thor Ragnarok than Spider-Man Far From Home. Well, there goes my.
Well, they didn't work on Spider-Man Far From Home, but
okay. Yeah, I mean, Homecoming was similar. I found it more tolerable, but
that's the best praise. I love praise. I found it more tolerable.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess my thinking is, it's interesting because I feel like years ago people would have like eaten up this kind of humor in this movie. It feels like it would have just absolutely slapped in like 2015, 2016. But I'm worried that it'll sour some people. But my point number two, I guess, in defense of that a little bit, this is also something I'm worried about, but because of what like D&D is about for so many people, like a game being about like it's so much about improvisation and like a group of friends just getting together for a night to have fun. I think most people's D&D experiences are just absolutely ridiculous. It ends up being just like moments where something silly happens because of the way the dice roll. And in a movie like it like I know in a campaign of ours, like, and this is a high fantasy setting where hypothetically it's pretty serious, but like I know in one of my campaigns, a character was trying to sneak, like our warlock was trying to sneak and be like to remain unnoticed in a tavern, and ended up wading through a sea of empty beer cans and like making a bunch of noise, which is really slapstick, but it's just like the way the dice rolled, the way things worked out, and we were joking around. And then like in our current campaign, because of the spell that the enemies cast, they all got turned into frogs and captured in little cages. Uh, uh, like D&D is just ripe for all of these like silly experiences that when you're at the table playing, it's like just hilarious. because you're just like, how did we get here? Like, what decisions did we make to have this ridiculous thing happen when a second ago we might have been really emotional because of like someone almost dying, and now this is happening. And so I feel like it'd be very hard to write an authentic D&D screenplay for the masses of people who enjoy it without some shenanigans that wouldn't fly in a typical standard epic fantasy. Like what would be silly in Lord of the Rings or something would feel right at home in a D&D movie. So my hope is that, like, you know, maybe the like type of humor aside, at least maybe it would feel more authentic in a movie like this to be a little silly. And what I'm excited for is, like, you know, I'm hoping for, like, you know, there's clearly from the trailer, there's a lot of like substantial D&D references for fans to look out for. And like the hope is really that, like, if they cared a lot about the lore and like history of D&D, I think there's a lot of there could be a lot of enjoyment for everyone who's into it. You know, kind of having this story, but the framework of it might match a lot of people's experiences with the game because they're throwing similar encounters at them. I know in the trailer they're fighting a mimic, which is a classic, and a gelatinous cube, I believe, which are like famous D&D monsters. The druid can transform into an owl bear, which is you know, another famous monster. That reminds me, actually, I wanted to bring up just one still, some to. All right, just the crew there.
Oh, there it is.
That's right. No, we've definitely got a bard and a druid and a barbarian here. Let me get back on track. Yeah, so there's a lot of good references to look out for, which is really what I'm most excited for. Is I'm like, whether it's good or not, I'm very excited. It's basically going to be an immediacy, at least just to go and, you know, see this take on it that will, like, maybe like, it's just going to be really fun to see on the big screen, like people getting attacked by a mimic and stuff. That
So
are
this is a theatrical movie.
Yeah, this is. I mean, this is. I mean,
almost by Paramount.
Positive. It's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, a lot went into this for sure. But so, like, I feel like I feel like Dungeons and Dragons has had too big of a history and too big of a thing in my life to where, like, this movie would never ruin it. So the stakes are not very high. It's just a movie based on a game. So, like, its implications on the canon are none at all. So it doesn't really matter if it's bad, I guess, for that reason. But I do think that there's a high probability that this could absolutely suck to me. That I could just be like, anytime anyone brings up this movie, I'm just like, let's not talk about that while we're playing D&D. I don't want to remember that. But there's also a chance that this will be like an amazing, like, fun movie that I can, like, say, like, hey, you want to know what D&D is like? You're gonna love this. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited for it. One of my favorite, like, IPs in the world, I guess. So that's Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves.
Oh yes, the first film came out in the year 2000 and has a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. and grossed $33.8 million on a budget of $45 million. So
nice.
Nowhere to go but up.
I have to say, like, that's a bad time for it too, because like Dungeons and Dragons was obviously like super popular in like the 80s, like the second edition came out. And I think after that, sometime in the 90s and definitely in the early 2000s and stuff, I think it was kind of considered dead. And it was only when what is it? I don't know when Wizards of the Coast acquired it, but when they started releasing stuff, particularly after 5th edition was released, it's had a resurgence and it's probably more popular now than ever. So yeah, coming out with a D&D movie in 2000 makes a lot less sense than coming out with a D&D movie in 2023, because right now it's ripe for having a lot of eyes on it, and yeah, it's people are gonna actually go see this one, I think. So but yeah, like I said, just extremely excited whenever I see something extremely public. I mean, I was also thrilled when I saw the first episode of this newest season of Stranger Things that like an entire like half of the first episode was a D&D game. So always thrilled to see more stuff, more public D&D stuff.
Oh yes. So, I guess, was that all you had for Dungeons and Dragons?
It is, although I do have another show and tell. I bought this like last week. It's a really old magazine from 1992, Dragon magazine, which was like, yeah, it is. I went to a game store that had just like stacks and stacks of these old magazines for like nerd stuff, and this is a like basically a Dungeons and Dragons magazine from yeah, I think Dragon magazine was basically the official Dungeons and Dragons magazine, which pretty cool relic. It's not super. It was $3. So